morning. Welcome to the virtual Community of the Wild Goose. I'm Henry Rojas, and I am in my kitchen inviting you to have coffee with me and have a sort of speak conversation, but it's really a one-way conversation where I just have my way. But you are free to text something to me, chat, whatever this is called, the open chat, welcome to the live chat, whatever that thing is that YouTube calls it. Feel free to type a message in there if you want, or if you want to ask a question or make a comment. Everybody but Jim Hansen, because I know the comments that he's going to make. So I just want you to know, you don't want to be in our conversations, private conversations via telephone. He's up at Flagstaff now. And, but, you know, keep it clean, Jim. Anyway, you're welcome to do that or throw a question at me or whatever. And you might think that, like, since it's in my kitchen and kind of a coffee hour kind of time or half an hour, that it's kind of loosey-goosey and that's why my messages sound kind of casual and that kind of thing. But you know what? When we meet in person, it's no different. It's awkward and it's spontaneous, and I have hecklers, and and we value the engagement between speaker and listener, live and in living color, and if nothing else, it's entertaining because, as we call it, sometimes anything can happen Sunday. But I do have a few notes and things I'd like to talk about. I just don't know how it's going to play out. So many things have been on my mind lately and running through, as I'm sure it is with everybody, between, you know, the just the difficult political climate, the pandemic, just the confusion, and then a lot of personal things too, and people struggling in their own lives. It's just it's amazing how noisy it can be in this isolating, quiet pandemic, and yet so noisy. But what has risen up louder than our typical sounds of many family and friends around us and activities is the loud honking sounds, and I don't mean of wild goose, of information, of what you ought to be thinking, what we think we should believe to be right and to be true. And here's what I want to do, is I want to first encourage you to consider the open mind, to begin with the beautiful first step of innocence, before adding layers and layers of despair, ideas, conclusions, and just be able to stop and go to the innocence of unknowing. Wow, that was loud, and I didn't like that. So I turned the sound off on that. So to go to that innocence of unknowing, what do I mean by that? When I'm going to do spiritual direction with someone, and I sense that they are locked into some preconceived ideas and thoughts, one of the things I want to know is, well, two things. I want to know, number one, as we began, and this may not be the kind of thing you would do in typical spiritual direction, but when you see somebody who is wanting to have a discussion about some things, and I'll say, are you willing to let go of your theology? And are you willing to look at your fears? Those two things, I think, are really important as you look at especially our environment Am I willing to let go of my theology? And am I willing to look at my fears? And that's a beginning question. And if the answer then is yes, then here's my suggestion, is that you begin with that innocence of unknowing by letting go of what you thought you knew. And when you imagine yourself letting go of all that you knew, almost like an empty moment, an open container that can be filled with whatever it is you're about to hear it create, move within, letting go of the burdens of what you thought you knew. First, pause, and near the end of today's message, I'm going to speak about that pause again, but pause and just take an assessment of how your body feels in just letting go. Is there anxiety? Is there distress? Are you a little upset? Is it rattling some inner cages? Do you feel a question on whether you're doing it right or not? Do you feel it in your body when you think about letting go? And if that in itself is difficult, first of all, you're not alone. It's the human condition. We have preoccupied ourselves with our own ideas and thoughts for so long, it's hard to break free of that for one moment. Have you been maybe taught or told that you should never empty your mind, that the Eastern religions are going to enter in the back door and Satan's going to grab a hold of you? Seriously, I was told that. Yoga, bad. The words contemplative, bad. Meditation, bad. Unless meditation is meditating on the Bible. All these fears. So if you let go of some of those things, does it feel kind of unnerving? To let go of your theology as a Christian, Presbyterian, Baptist, Southern Baptist, Pentecostal, Catholicism, in all of those things, what does it feel like when you just let go and empty yourself? That in itself might be something you want to spend time with. And just first pause and take an assessment of those things, and then notice what questions come up for you. The discontent, the fear. Are you being tapped on the shoulder from those three demons I've talked about, those three proverbial demons that need to be right, they need to be enough, and they need to be in control? I know that comes up for us many times as we look at our religion of the past. Right or wrong, there's the fear of deviating. What might happen? Do we, as we let go of our ideas and our politics, do you feel in your body or in your mind the fear or the sense that you're going to let go of control or of being right or being enough? Or that some who are trying to wrest control over you or from you are going to win in some way? That chaos will ensue? See, I think that's what's happened a lot of times in our culture in these days, is the fear that somebody is taking over, somebody is going to dominate me, and in return, in what I think is fighting for freedom, I'm attempting to dominate them. And so I'm going to look at that in a minute, but this beginning place of openness is where we start. So we give ourselves to the moment of emptiness, of innocence, of unknowing, and then pause and notice what you're experiencing in your body and in your mind. And with compassion, recognize any resistance. With compassion, recognize any questions that arise. And when those parts of you rise up with resistance, interview them. Ask them, why is that there? What is that fear and where is it coming from? With compassion, regardless of whether it's rational or irrational, it's there. It's there. And that's how we face these things and detach from them and take a look at them. You know, when people ask me in sessions, how do I get rid of shame? If I'm in a group, what I will say is, let's imagine that shame has identified with you, or you have identified with shame so much that it seems as though it's a part of you and you cannot get rid of it. And if there's a whiteboard there, I take a pen and I write shame on the board and I stand close to it. It's like as though it's so close to me that it's a part of me, that shame or that guilt, that unnecessary guilt and shame. And what I need to do is walk away from it and then face it and see my shame separately from myself. So it is a feeling, but it's separate from myself, and I can see it for what it is. And I'm standing in my true self, and I'm letting go of something that I didn't know wasn't a part of me. Same way with our politics, with our religious thinking. It becomes so embedded in our thinking that we don't know that it's not really who I am. And then another place we can go is to ask ourselves, are my actions and is my life, whether it be in moments or in the totality of it, is it aligned with who I really am? Is it aligned with who I really am? You know, we have situations today where family members are in shock that another family member they love deeply has taken positions that just don't seem to fit with how they know that person. It's happening every day. It's happening all around. And in ourselves, we can ask ourselves that too. See, that's what infidelity is. Infidelity is when you're not aligned with that you are one with. And to show fidelity and devotion is to reassess how far I have drifted from my true self and what I really believe to be true. Regardless of what your belief system is, if it's important to you, how far have you deviated from who you really are? It's not in our nature to be so selfish and narcissistic that we would wish pain on someone else. And yet, in my desire for freedom, has it been at the expense of somebody else's well-being or freedom? If I am wealthy, is my wealth so situated that one must be poor in order for me to be wealthy? You see, it takes the demonization off of being rich and just asking yourself, in the same way, has my giving it all away and an appearance of selflessness actually been not in alignment with a belief that I belong and I'm somebody, and I think I need to win that over by being charitable, by manipulating love out of others that they might see how good I am? Boy, you just think about those things and it's like, we are really screwed up, aren't we? Woo. Take a little sip of coffee. Take a pause. As we open ourselves up, if we did that, those few little thoughts and exercises before we engaged in our battles, in our conversations, what might it do to let go first and listen to what spirit might be telling us, where our angst is, where our frustration is, where our disappointment is? What is it that I am feeling, and where am I feeling it? I know I appreciate it so much when my spiritual directors or a therapist or someone says, Henry, where is that coming from? And what are you feeling in your body? Constriction, frustration, tenseness in my body, anger in my emotions, a strictness in our body what, not strictness, you know what I mean, a stiffness in our body. Man, that's how we get. If that's the way you feel at times, man, do some exercises to stop, return to the innocence of unknowing with compassion, pause, breathe, get all the oxygen you can in that moment. With compassion, become detached from what you're experiencing emotionally, and take a look at it as though it's written on a whiteboard, and look at that. And then begin to align with who you really are, not who you have found yourself to be in your actions and your words. You might even find yourself being drawn to tears with compassion for yourself. I had no idea I had gone there. It's people are so sucked into a way of thinking sometimes that it's almost as though we have to be deprogrammed. And my guess in my work and a lot of work of those who do therapy, there's going to be some deprogramming, some regret, some remorse. There's families that are estranged in some ways because of some being drawn into things that don't align with who they really are. I want to give you my definition of freedom. One of the many definitions, and freedom's an incredible thing. You can define it in many different ways. Freedom is a space and a place for creative passion that allows the kingdom of limitless possibilities to expand both socially and individually. Freedom is a space and a place for creative passion, allowing for the kingdom of limitless possibilities, both individual and social. To look at our own ideas, our ideologies, to see how we can get misaligned with who we really are. I'm going to take a look not from a position of myself being in any one of these, but from an outside, not saying that I don't have a thought or an opinion or a leaning, but I want to look at it from both the conservative, liberal, and liberation theology for a minute, because it speaks to today, but it speaks mostly in this regard to our own faith and journey. So when I speak of freedom, it's neither conservative nor liberal. As we talk about freedom, we got to fight for freedom. And I don't really understand the idea of fighting for freedom. I understand that we need to sometimes fight for our autonomy as a country, our democracy as a country. But the idea of freedom, perhaps we're all talking about meaning something different when we scream the word freedom. Okay. So not conservative, not speaking of this, for in the extreme desire of conservative ideas of freedom, it's for moral authority, and it becomes a lordship and a domination as though an authoritarian God is on their side. And why I'm saying that is because it goes back in ancient years to the pre-medieval times of doing battle and thinking that if victory is won, then God must be on our side. And even post-feudalism, in liberalism, it occurred in a different way, because the liberal side of misunderstanding freedom is associating an authoritarian God that has been associated with the conservative and saying, I want nothing to do with that. So they espouse atheistic statements. All right. So liberals often, in their view of conservative Christians, that are using God to battle for political power, will embrace atheistic themes. And then a liberal society is absent of love. And absent of love, it is a society composed of free and equal but solitary individuals. And is that really freedom? So you can see the two extremes. On the one hand, I want to have victory and power and dominion in order to pursue having the moral authority, because God is on my side if we win. If we lose, we don't know what to think, right? maybe need to reassume power and dominion. On the other side, you have the liberal Christian thinking that can be destructive in thinking that, well, the conservative Christians have aligned with God, therefore I don't believe in God, and I fight for an individual freedom of equality. But it too doesn't necessarily think of the equality as much as my own individual freedom and my own individual satisfaction. And so we end up not being in community, but be more in causes. To have a liberating theology is to embrace two stories that speak to both of these things. One is the Exodus story. The children of Israel coming out of Egypt, out of slavery. So in the liberating theology, it is anti-enslavement. That's I think the essence of a holistic, organic, beautiful, all-in-one Christianity that is where even in the Exodus, the idea of spirit is in that process of coming out of enslavement. It is that which is called the Christ, as Richard Rohr speaks of in the Universal Christ. And it was there, the Ruach, the Spirit of God. For if that is what life is, then it is spirit and it is life-giving. And they were led by the Spirit out of the wilderness, out of enslavement to Egypt. So we cannot separate ourselves from a liberating theology of Christ also being that which is a theology of coming out of enslavement. So to be anti-enslavement is always a journey of freedom of our faith. You see, it has nothing to do with the politics, but it affects our politics. So to recognize that we are always battling enslavement, whether it be by our own enslavement to guilt and shame and my own thinking and theology, which is why I began the way I did, or I am enslaved by my politics or my ideology. I become enslaved by that. Now I think I might be free, but I'm actually enslaved by something. So the liberating theology is both about the Exodus, but it's also about the resurrection. The idea of resurrection, which is Christ made manifest in the human body, the Spirit, which was there always, the universal Christ, being manifest in all things, which is really crazy because in Colossians 3, when Paul, who is used so often to promote conservative values when it comes to this type of conservative, not a good conservative kind of, I want the Constitution to be supported and that kind of thing. I'm talking about this extreme part of it that has divisions in it for the purposes of moral authority. We're free from that. And it says, put on, in Colossians 3, put on a new person, on the new person who was renewed. Now, that new person is when you've recognized what your behaviors are that don't align with you being a new person. What is that new person? Put on the new person who was renewed in knowledge according to the image of the capital One who created you, where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcised nor uncircumcised, which could be, think of that in terms of the law of you don't belong unless you do this or this or this or this. Okay? Barbarian, Scythian, slave, nor free. Wow. So he is speaking to a time of divisions, not unlike ours or any of the human condition along the human race timeline. But then he says this sentence, for Christ is all Christ is all and in all. What? Christ is all and in all. That is unbelievable. That it actually says that in the Bible, that Christ is all and in all. That in the resurrection story, it means that it says to us that Christ anointedness is filling the earth, is all around us, in you and I, without restriction. It is our awareness that has to awaken to that. So those conservative values war against it because it goes back to the ancient days of dominion by war, by battle, by militarism. It takes us back to those days that say, like Herod, that if there is a battle and there is victory, it means God was on my side. But it also takes us away from the liberal side that says, I don't want anything to do with that God if that's a God, so I don't believe in God, and I become God in the process. Now, I look like I want equality for all people, but the methods by which I go about it are absent of love. They're absent of connection. They're socially disjointed. And both are striving for my own dominion with my own way of thinking. Liberation theology embraces both the Exodus story of freedom from slavery and the resurrection, the tangible oneness, the all in all, plant and animal, flora and fauna, human beings. In Psalms, it speaks of the whole earth singing, worshiping the one who is the all in all. How can I do that if I see another as an opposition? See, it doesn't mean that unity means that we don't agree, that we all have to think the same. It means that I recognize the Christ in you and in the all in all, the same that was revealed in spirit in the Exodus of coming out of enslavement, that I can look at somebody who is still experiencing racism and discrimination. And just because I am not experiencing it, I feel like I cannot stand with someone who is experiencing it. No, or because I haven't experienced it. No, it means that I see that if that's experiencing, I am one with that too in some ways. I would want the same in reverse. And so from a liberating theology, I need to create that space for the kingdom of limitless possibilities, not just for myself, but for others as well. Because that's what the nature of both the Exodus of coming out of enslavement and the spirit of the resurrection speaks to, as all of the earth being renewed. I remember watching an Andy Griffith one time where Opie rescued these little tiny baby birds. You remember that one? Andy Griffith Watchers. And he was so proud of himself for rescuing these little birds. And when he rescued these birds and he held them and he protected them, they were at the mercy of Opie. But they were free from death. They were being nurtured. They were being rescued and brought out. Now, Opie had all the control. He had authority and control, right? But there's the paradox. See, there is only one type of enslavement that works. And that is when I become a slave to Christ, meaning the Christ of the Spirit of which is in all, and then revealed in the person of Jesus, as it is with us. But the Christ who was all, as it says in Colossians, is all and in all. That's the Christ. So when I give myself as a slave to Christ, I am giving myself to you, to myself, to others, to the world, and to see the oneness in that. How healing that would be. It doesn't mean that I go, oh, okay, I guess we all agree on everything. No, no, no. It's the way I perceive someone else. And then my heart can ache when they suffer or they are a victim of racism. Or they are a victim of being misguided and misled. So if we think in terms of coming out of enslavement and seeing the all in all, then we can begin to see why in the Exodus story, Moses is trying to explain to these folks that are coming out of one enslavement, not to enslave themselves with an extreme other side of dispensing with a God and creating their own God. No, he's saying, even though you're in the middle of your despair, and he says, remember all the things that happened along the way. And as we came to this place that we were given by God to possess it, the promised land, they were on the precipice and the edge of this transformational change. So the future plays a part in our freedom, because it is that is the part of the kingdom of the limitless possibilities, the place to create with passion what is going to occur, not hold on to what is, but to look forward to what can be, working together in this. And he said, look, the Lord your God has set the land before you. Go up and possess it as the Lord God of your fathers has spoken to you. Do not be discouraged. Do not be afraid. And anytime he said, do not be discouraged, don't be afraid, you know what the reality is probably a good time to be discouraged and to be afraid. And we feel a sense of despair. And it's weird that I would put up that quote by Nelson Mandela that says, courage is not the absence of despair, but rather the capacity to move ahead in spite of your despair. Let me repeat that. Courage is not the absence of despair, but rather the capacity to move ahead in spite of your despair. It's not that we ignore being despaired, being in despair. But, you know, I've seen some posts and I've gotten some calls and I've heard of language because I'm involved in the Christian community where even some of my friends are Christian therapists or whatever, and I hear them beginning to say masks are bad because people communicate by a nonverbal communication, and that's why they're depressed and wanting to kill themselves. If we use our minuscule expertise, I don't care what degrees you have, your minuscule expertise to overshoot the expertise of the Spirit of God, which is so much greater than ours, then we will play the role of God and attempt to use the little expertise that we have to manipulate others to believe a certain political way. Watch out for that. Watch out for that, both in others and in myself. Watch out for that. To manipulate being seen as an expert, to use that expertise, as limited as it is, to put shade on something that is fact, to attempt to manipulate others. That too is an enslavement. All right? And then Moses says, every one of you came near to me and said, let us send men before us and let them search out the land for us and bring back word to us of the way by which we should go and of the cities into which we shall come. See, they were freaking out because they didn't want to possess this future, this promised land. They were on the precipice of, they came out of enslavement, but their despair of that moment is paralyzing them. And we felt that way before. And he's trying to coax them to move forward. And they say, well, prove it to us by giving us some tangible witnesses. And so he says, that looked good to me. So I got 12 of your men, one man from each of the tribes. And they departed and scouted out and looked up there and prove it. They wanted proof. And they also took some fruit of the land in their hands and brought it down to us. And they brought the word back to us and said, it's a good land. The evidence is it's a good land. The facts were, it's a good land that God has given us. And we should go and possess it. Nevertheless, you would not go, and you rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. You see, the command of Lycope taking possession of those birds was the paradox of being held in captivity in freedom. It doesn't make sense. But yet when we give ourselves to be a slave to Christ, the all in all, it is actually the only thing that can actually give me freedom. There's the paradox. That's Opie with those birds. But then when they got older and he encaged them, he wanted them as pets. And he was mourning the idea of letting go. But see, true freedom means that I create freedom for others. True freedom means that I create freedom for others. And he mourned and grieved but he made the decision to let those 3 birds go. But for that time, they were slaves to him, but he was anointed the life giver. And that's the only one we should be enslaved to. Such a paradox. So this refusal and rebellion was against the command of God. What was God's command? To enter into freedom. To be guided into a place where you're able to create instead of being dominated by your fears. And he says, and you complained in your tents and said, because the Lord hates us, he has brought us out of the land of Egypt to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites. Have you ever heard that one? If God was a God of love, these things wouldn't be happening. He's drawing us into something. Where can we go? Where can we go? Our brethren have discouraged our hearts, saying the people are greater and taller than we are. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. Moreover, we have seen the sons of Anak there. Don't we do that sometimes? Our fears create giants in our mind. Our nightmares take on reality instead of it just being a nightmare. And our despair becomes paralyzing instead of our ability to move courageously in faith. He said, then I said to you, Moses said, do not be terrified or afraid of them. The Lord your God who goes before you, he will fight for you according to all he did for you in Egypt before you. He fights. I don't fight. He fights. And the wilderness where you saw how the Lord your God carried you as a man carries his child in all the way that you went until you came to this place. Yet for all that you did not believe the Lord your God, who went in the way before you to search out a place for you to pitch your tents, to show you the way you should go, in the fire by night and in the cloud by day. My daughter Annie and I were just talking about that this morning, how, we look back sometimes, we're like, wow, I guess what we did was right, but it felt wrong at the time. How can that be sometimes? When you lack wisdom and you seek wisdom, wisdom doesn't always come, and normally doesn't, in the mindfulness, in the mind thinking, I should say, in thoughts. It's when we open ourselves up to the innocence of unknowing and allow the instincts of who I really am to take over. In the midst of my despair, that's the faith action taken in the face of great fear and doubt. It's Indiana Jones stepping out beyond that cliff where there is nothing but a canyon drop. I refer to this story a lot, and he stands there in fear. But he remembers the words of his father to take the leap of faith, but there's no guarantee. And finally, in his desperation, in his despair that there's no other way, he takes a step. And he finds himself standing on a bridge that he could not see until he took that step. You see, the miracle wasn't that the bridge appeared out of nothing. It was that it was always there, but he couldn't see it from the angle, from the perception by which he looked. So he had to empty himself up and give himself to the innocence of unknowing in the beginning. Face the fears on the whiteboard and the shame of not knowing, and take a step away from my ideology, from my conservatism, from my liberalism, and into the liberating theology of anti-enslavement not enslaved by my fears, not enslaved by my ideology, not enslaved by my past, not enslaved by the idea that people aren't doing what I think they ought to be doing, not enslaved by my pride and my ego that says I cannot say that I might be wrong, not enslaved by my behaviors for fear of consequence, but that I see them for what they are without a necessity to rid myself of them. And I give myself to this journey of limitless possibilities. I give myself to the freedom of being able to create out of nothing. As they used to sing in the black gospel churches, that God finds a way out of no way. That's the wisdom I want to be enslaved by. For me, it's Christ in me who lives, not I. Because when it's me, I am limited. I have limited possibilities. But when I give myself to that which is greater than myself, into the oneness and the all in all, where Christ is, both in his history, in the Exodus, in the person of Jesus, not for purposes of evangelizing. My Jewish friends have that Christ in them just as much as I do, because it's representative of this creative spirit that brought all things into being and who brings us into a restoration and resurrection. But we have to stop and find out if we are willing to open ourselves up to the innocence of unknowing, to let go of all those preconceived ideas of what I thought to be true, no matter whether you spent your life in a theology that was for dominion and power and moral authority, or thinking that you had to subscribe to the atheistic themes that say, I am my own God with self-determination and we are all equal and we should all love each other as equal, and yet we don't love each other because we are separate in a cage where Opie had us. And while we gave ourselves in slavery to be rescued and nurtured, is that same authority that opens the cage when it's safe, it sets us free, and we interact with all as being one. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They that wait, pause, breathe, take an assessment. Feel the burdens begin to leave, but notice the fears of letting those burdens go, the ideologies go. They that wait upon that Lord, a new one to be enslaved to, not one that demands dominion, shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. I want to close with my favorite, John O'Donohue, on freedom, as we consider ourselves one with. And to my friends and experts, therapists, pastors, doctors, nurses, whoever you are, who also have their own leadings and bias and maybe have manipulated others to believe a certain way or a certain thing. No, you don't need masks. Or the other extreme, you need to be a bubble person inside of a plastic and never breathe and never see anyone. And then manipulate others to be able to arrive at the place where you are. We let go of that and we become one. I'm looking out right now in this beautiful rain and the green grass that speaks of life. And you even being there as we join together, speaking of oneness. And we let go and give ourselves to the innocence of unknowing to begin and see ourselves as one. May we experience this. As a bird soars high in the free holding of the wind, clear of the uncertainty of ground, opening the imagination of wings into the grace of emptiness, to fulfill new voyagings. May your life awaken to the call of its freedom. As the ocean absolves itself of the expectation of land, approaching only in the form of waves that fill and pleat and fall with such gradual elegance as to make of the limit a sonorous threshold whose music echoes back along the give and strain of memory. Thus may your heart know the patience that can draw infinity from limitation. As the embrace of the earth welcomes all we call death, taking deep into itself the light solitude of a seed, allowing it time to shed the grip of former form and give way to a deeper generosity that will one day send it forth. A tree into springtime. May all that holds you fall from its hungry ledge into the fecund surge of your heart. Be enslaved only to one thing. It's a daily renewal, a letting go of past ideas and theology, an admission that I attempted to be God, to either have dominion or total individuality, that I may have used God's truth with Satan's ways. And I rest in the grace of the God who says, I get it, child. Things got pretty messed up. And you began to believe what you were hearing from people who were not following the one who brings liberty. Be at peace today. Enjoy the Arizona rain. And if you're not in Arizona, enjoy whatever weather you're getting. And I will see you either on Tuesday and Thursday's Wake Up with Henry's on 7 a.m. Arizona time on Instagram. Subscribe, or next Sunday morning. Peace.